Enlightenment is one of those things where the moment you claim it, it's gone. This video today was inspired by 2 comments that I got last week. The first comment was left on my microdosing story video, and the person was apparently triggered by my use of the word should, and he took it upon himself to let me know. He was like, you should stop using the word should because it makes you come across as unenlightened. The second comment that I got was left on my psychedelic trip report video, and the person was like, stop talking about yourself, expand your consciousness and become one. These 2 comments got me thinking about the sheer irony and hypocrisy of it all. That in a community of people who purport to be on a spiritual path, that we would still see so much ego coming from people who are essentially claiming that they have transcended ego. In today's video, I want to unpack the concept of spiritual narcissism, and I want to talk more about the ego. How can we tell the difference between the voice of our ego and the voice of our intuition? It's not so clear cut, especially when you think that you've already had certain spiritual experiences under your belt. So if you are in the mood for a different kind of message today, keep watching and don't forget to give this video a like because you can always change your mind later. So let's begin by revisiting a few basics. Our ego refers to our sense of self and all of the stories that come with it. It is where our sense of who we are comes from. In spiritual circles, they say the ego is illusory because it can be dissolved through sheer awareness of your moment-to-moment experience. Our ego is an evolutionary survival mechanism. It is the filter through which we interact with the world. At times, this filter might have been what we needed to survive, like when you're on the playground being bullied and your ego goes, screw them, they're dumb, you'll show them. But now that we're adults in situations where we have the freedom to choose where to go and who to associate with, our ego can often stand in the way of our happiness. And it does this by creating separation where connectedness would have made us happier. While many of us now have an understanding of how maladaptive the ego can be, transcending the ego is an entirely different matter. Some people devote their whole lives to the spiritual path for this kind of transcendence. But for most of us, we tend to only get glimpses into what this kind of transcendence feels like. The duration of the glimpses that we get depends on the intensity of the practices we undertake. Say, for example, taking a 5-gram heroic dose of psilocybin mushrooms is going to give you a different level of ego dissolution than meditating for 5 minutes. The process of ego dissolution can in itself feel quite destabilizing, but what awaits on the other side is a sense of love, oneness, and liberation. All beautiful feelings, but feelings that tend not to last. Here's what usually happens. After we feel this oneness, this love, we tend to go back to our lives, we go back to our human existences, and the filter of our ego kicks back in. So what about the people who say they've achieved enlightenment and now go around with an attitude of, I'm enlightened, you're not? The Tibetan Buddhist meditation guru Chögyam Trungpa once said that the ego can convert anything to its own use, even spirituality. Trungpa is credited for coining the term spiritual materialism, which refers to the use of spiritual pursuits to satisfy our ego-based needs. Spiritual materialism fools us into thinking we are transcending our ego when really we are just developing it. This often presents as a belief that you are more spiritual than others because you have accumulated more spiritual knowledge. Those comments that I shared with you earlier, I don't doubt that the writers of those comments have more spiritual experiences than I do. I don't doubt that they know more about spirituality than I do, and they might have even spent more years on a spiritual path than I have. But enlightenment is one of those things where the moment you claim it, it's gone. And we are all susceptible to this trap. The further we journey on the spiritual path, the more susceptible we become to the pitfall of spiritual materialism and its more severe incarnation, spiritual narcissism. In psychology, the centrality principle states that people tend to self-enhance more in areas that matter more to them. For example, somebody who values their appearance a lot will be motivated to spend more time at the gym. This is a principle that applies to virtually every domain of personal development and and skill acquisition. And spirituality is not exempt. Somebody who values the ideals of spirituality will be more motivated to pursue the spiritual path. And like with any skill, the more you cultivate it, the better you feel about your competency in it. And that in turn raises your self-esteem. Self-centrality and self-enhancement aren't necessarily bad things. They're not necessarily things that we can avoid either, because they just might be baked into the human psyche. But while we can't avoid them entirely, we can change how we are in relation to them. Will we let our competency in a certain skill give rise to the belief that we are better than others? Or can we simply just feel good about our own efforts and leave it at that? I almost even feel that if you're going to go around with an air of spiritual superiority, the bar ought to be raised higher for you to demonstrate the kind of egolessness you purport. Now, I want to close this video by sharing some practical tips for ego awareness. This section of the video was something that I needed to write for myself because my ego is something that I struggle with. It's like I know enough about it now to recognize it, but I don't have enough experience in ego dissolution where I can completely keep myself in check. So this is something I'm working on, and maybe these tips will be helpful for you as well. Here are 5 ways to distinguish between the voice of your ego and the voice of your intuition. Number 1, the ego promotes separation while intuition promotes connectedness. Whether the voice inside causes you to feel like you're better than others or worse than others, you can be sure that that is the voice of your ego. Number 2, the ego constantly justifies while intuition is quietly resolute. If the voice inside is constantly making justifications for something, there's a good chance that the thing that it is trying to justify isn't strong enough to stand on its own merits. Intuition, on the other hand, requires no justification. The answers it provides are simple, stoic, and don't lend themselves to much scrutiny. Number 3, the ego judges, the intuition accepts. Number 4, the ego perpetuates a sense of danger, while intuition perpetuates no such thing. A great way to get a read on this is to check in on how you're feeling. Are you feeling anxious, stressed, fearful of losing something or not getting enough of what you want? If the character of your experience is marked by a sense of scarcity, that's a surefire sign that that is your ego at play. Intuition, on the other hand, is steady and secure, and it tells you that you are enough in this moment. You have everything you need in this moment. Nothing about this moment needs to change, and that is a drastically different character of awareness. Last but not least, the ego is rooted in the past or the future, while intuition is rooted in the now. That is it for our video today. I hope you guys enjoyed this little message. In the comment section, I would love to hear about any encounters you've had with spiritual narcissism, or whether it's something you've struggled with in the past. Spiritual narcissism is heavily linked to another construct known as communal narcissism. It's where instead of saying, I'm the greatest, I have the best words, instead you insinuate that you are the most helpful person around. We see a lot of this in people who feign humility and charity when in reality they are just using these qualities as vehicles to signal to others how virtuous they are. The beautiful thing about spirituality is that it's one of those things where you can tell it, you can know it by its fruits. You'll know if someone is truly secure in themselves. You'll know if someone has truly transcended because they're not waving it in your face. They are just at peace, and you know it. You will know it by how they carry themselves. At least that's how I understand it. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining me for this video, and I will see you next time.